What would you do if a doctor looked at your dying child and said she wasn't worth saving? That's exactly what happened to Jessica Thompson at 2 in the morning when her 7-year-old daughter Emma couldn't breathe. The emergency room doctor took one look at Jessica's expired insurance card, glanced at her waitress uniform, and made a decision that would change multiple lives forever. He refused treatment, told Jessica she should have thought about healthcare costs before having a child, then sent them away to a clinic that didn't even exist anymore. But what this arrogant doctor didn't know was that someone was watching. Someone with the power to destroy everything he'd built with a single phone call. Someone who was about to teach him that karma doesn't care about your medical degree or your expensive watch. What happened next shocked everyone in that hospital, ruined a career that took decades to build, and turned a desperate mother's worst night into the beginning of justice served ice cold. This is the story of how one man's cruelty toward a sick child cost him everything he thought mattered. And by the end, you'll see exactly why the universe has a way of making sure some debts get paid in full. The clock on Jessica Thompson's dashboard read 1:47 a.m. when her 7-year-old daughter Emma started wheezing in the back seat. Not the usual wheeze that Jessica had learned to manage over the past 3 years since Emma's asthma diagnosis. This was different, desperate, terrifying. "Mommy, I can't." Emma's words came out in broken gasps, her small chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow movements that made Jessica's heart pound against her ribs. Jessica pressed harder on the gas pedal of her 15-year-old Honda Civic, the engine protesting with a grinding noise she'd been ignoring for months. She couldn't afford car repairs. She could barely afford groceries. But right now, none of that mattered. Her daughter was fighting for every breath. "We're almost there, baby. Hold on for Mommy." Jessica's voice stayed calm even as panic clawed at her throat. She'd perfected this skill over years of single motherhood, hiding her fear behind steady words that Emma needed to hear. The emergency room at Mercy General Hospital was surprisingly quiet for a Tuesday night. Jessica burst through the automatic doors carrying Emma, whose lips had taken on a bluish tint that made Jessica's stomach drop. "This was bad. Really bad. Please, I need help. My daughter can't breathe." Jessica's words tumbled out as she approached the reception desk where a tired-looking woman in scrubs barely glanced up from her computer screen. "Insurance card and ID," the receptionist said in a monotone voice, extending her hand without making eye contact. Jessica fumbled through her worn purse with shaking hands, Emma still struggling in her arms. She found her insurance card, knowing exactly what was coming next. The card had expired 2 months ago when she'd been laid off from her second job at the grocery store. She'd been trying to navigate the maze of healthcare applications ever since, but bureaucracy moved slowly and Emma's asthma didn't wait for paperwork. "This card expired in September," the receptionist said, finally looking up with obvious annoyance. "I know, but please, she's having a severe asthma attack. I can pay something. I have $43 in cash, and I can set up a payment plan for the rest. She just needs her breathing treatment and maybe some prednisone." The receptionist's expression didn't soften. "I'll need to get the doctor to approve treatment without current insurance. Have a seat, and someone will be with you." Jessica found a plastic chair in the waiting area that squeaked under her weight. Emma's wheezing had gotten worse, each breath a visible struggle that made other waiting patients glance over with concern. An elderly man offered Jessica his inhaler, thinking it might help, and she felt grateful tears sting her eyes at the simple kindness. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Emma's breathing became more labored, her small fingers gripping Jessica's arm with surprising strength. Jessica approached the desk again, desperation creeping into her voice. "Excuse me, my daughter is getting worse. Could someone please just look at her? I really think she needs immediate attention." "The doctor will see you when he's available," came the curt response. "We have protocols to follow." Another 15 minutes crawled by before a tall man in a white coat finally appeared. Dr. Richard Blackwood looked exactly like what Central Casting would order for a successful physician. Perfectly styled gray hair, expensive watch, the kind of confident bearing that came from a lifetime of privilege. His lab coat was pristine white, not a wrinkle or stain in sight. But when his eyes landed on Jessica, something cold flickered across his features. He took in her faded jeans with a small tear at the knee, her diner uniform shirt with Mel's 24-hour cafe embroidered on the chest, her scuffed sneakers that had seen better years. His gaze lingered on the expired insurance card in Jessica's trembling hand. What seems to be the problem? Dr. Blackwood's tone was professional but distant, the way someone might ask about the weather when they don't really care about the answer. My daughter Emma is having a severe asthma attack. She's had them before, but this one is different. She can barely breathe and her lips are turning blue. Please, she needs treatment now. Dr. Blackwood glanced at Emma with clinical detachment, not bothering to examine her properly. He didn't check her oxygen levels, didn't listen to her lungs, didn't even touch his stethoscope. Instead, he looked back at Jessica's expired insurance card. I see you don't have current insurance coverage. No, sir, but I can pay something now and arrange payments for the rest. She just needs her breathing treatment. I know exactly what she usually gets because we've been through this before at other hospitals. Dr. Blackwood's expression hardened. Mrs. Thompson, is it? I'm afraid our emergency department is at capacity tonight. We simply don't have the resources to accommodate non-emergency cases from patients without insurance coverage. Jessica stared at him in disbelief. Non-emergency? Doctor, look at her. She can barely breathe. Her lips are blue. How is this not an emergency? Children often present with dramatic symptoms that appear worse than they actually are, Dr. Blackwood said dismissively. There's a free clinic on Maple Street that opens at 8 a.m. I'd suggest you take her there. The casual cruelty of his words hit Jessica like a physical blow. She looked around the emergency room, counting the empty beds visible through partially open doorways. The place was far from capacity. In fact, it seemed unusually quiet for a major metropolitan hospital emergency room. Doctor, please. I'm begging you. Just look at her properly. Use your stethoscope. Check her oxygen levels. You'll see this is serious. Dr. Blackwood's jaw tightened with annoyance. Ma'am, I've made my assessment. The child is stable enough to wait for appropriate clinic care. This emergency room is for genuine emergencies, not for people who should have thought about healthcare costs before making certain life choices. The words hung in the air like poison. Jessica felt heat rise to her cheeks, but not from embarrassment. From rage. Pure, protective maternal rage that any parent would recognize. Certain life choices? She's 7 years old and she can't breathe. What kind of doctor are you? The kind who doesn't enable poor decision-making, Dr. Blackwood replied coldly. If you can't afford proper health care for a child, perhaps you should have considered that before having one. Nurse Linda Hayes, who had been pretending to organize supplies at a nearby station, stepped forward. Her face flushed with shame at what she was witnessing. Doctor, maybe we could just do a quick breathing treatment. It would only take. Nurse Hayes, we have protocols for a reason. Dr. Blackwood cut her off sharply. This facility cannot become a charity ward for every sob story that walks through our doors. We have paying patients who deserve priority. Jessica looked around desperately. The waiting room still had plenty of empty chairs. She could see into treatment rooms that stood vacant. There were no paying patients demanding priority. This wasn't about capacity or resources. This was about something much uglier. Please, Jessica whispered, her voice breaking. Emma's wheezing had become so labored that other patients were starting to stand up, clearly concerned. She's just a little girl. Dr. Blackwood remained unmoved. Security will escort you out if necessary. The free clinic opens in 6 hours. Your daughter will survive until then if you keep her calm and avoid creating unnecessary panic. The casual cruelty of dismissing a child's medical emergency as unnecessary panic was the final straw. Jessica stood up slowly, Emma still struggling in her arms, and looked Dr. Blackwood directly in the eye. I hope you remember this moment, she said quietly. I hope you remember turning away a sick child because her mother couldn't afford to make you rich tonight. Are you threatening me? Dr. Blackwood's voice took on a dangerous edge. No, doctor. I'm just hoping you remember. Sometimes the universe has a way of showing us exactly who we really are. Dr. Blackwood gestured toward the security guard who had been watching the exchange with obvious discomfort. Please escort this woman and her child off the premises. If they return tonight, call the police for trespassing. The security guard, a kind-faced man named Frank who was probably a grandfather himself, looked mortified. Ma'am, I'm sorry. I have to ask you to leave, but the free clinic on Maple Street is closed until morning. Jessica finished for him. I know. As Frank gently guided Jessica and Emma toward the exit, Nurse Linda Hayes caught Jessica's arm. She pressed a small piece of paper into Jessica's hand and whispered quickly, "Children's Hospital downtown has a different policy about uninsured emergencies. It's 20 minutes away, but they'll help her." Jessica squeezed Linda's hand gratefully, tears finally spilling over. At least one person in this place remembered what it meant to care about human life over billing codes. As they walked through the automatic doors, Jessica heard Dr. Blackwood telling the receptionist, "Make a note in the system. Thompson family is flagged as a collection risk. No future services without payment up front." The November air was bitter cold, making Emma's breathing even more difficult. Jessica strapped her daughter into the car seat, Emma's wheezes now coming in short, panicked bursts. The drive to Children's Hospital would take at least 20 minutes in traffic, maybe longer in her unreliable car. Jessica sat in the driver's seat for a moment, her hands shaking as she tried to start the engine. It turned over once, twice, then made a grinding noise that filled her with dread. On the third try, it started, but she could tell the engine was struggling. As she pulled out of the parking lot, Jessica caught a glimpse of Dr. Blackwood through the hospital window. He was laughing at something on his phone, completely unbothered by what had just occurred. He had dismissed a child's medical emergency and returned to his evening as if nothing had happened. "Hold on, Emma," Jessica whispered, pressing the gas pedal and praying her car would make it to Children's Hospital. "Mommy's going to find someone who cares more about little girls than money." She had no way of knowing that in less than 2 hours, Dr. Richard Blackwood's entire world would come crashing down around him. She had no way of knowing that the parking lot she was driving away from would soon become the stage for the most expensive mistake of one man's privileged life. All Jessica knew was that her daughter needed help, and she would drive to every hospital in the city if that's what it took. She was just a waitress with an expired insurance card and $43 to her name, but she was also a mother, and mothers don't give up. The Honda's engine made another grinding noise as she turned onto the main road, but it kept running. Behind her, Mercy General Hospital grew smaller in the rearview mirror, its bright lights fading into the distance. None of them knew that those lights would soon dim forever, and that the man who had turned away a sick child would discover just how quickly privilege could disappear when the wrong person witnessed your true character. But that reckoning was still an hour away. And for now, Jessica Thompson drove through the cold night with her daughter's labored breathing filling the silence, searching for someone who would see past an expired insurance card to the desperate mother and sick child who needed help. Jessica's Honda died exactly 3 blocks from Mercy General Hospital. The engine had been making increasingly desperate noises since leaving the parking lot, but Jessica had pushed it anyway, willing it to make the 20-minute drive to Children's Hospital. When the grinding finally stopped and was replaced by absolute silence, she knew her luck had run out completely. She tried the ignition again. Nothing. Not even the clicking sound that usually meant the battery was low. The car was completely dead, and Emma's breathing was getting worse by the minute. Jessica pulled out her phone with trembling fingers. Her screen showed 2% battery and no money in her account for an Uber. She had $43 in cash, but that wouldn't be enough for a taxi to get across the city. Every option was slipping away. "Mommy, I'm scared," Emma whispered between labored breaths. "I know, baby. Mommy's going to figure this out." But for the first time in years of single motherhood, Jessica felt completely helpless. She was stranded on a side street at 2:30 in the morning with a dying phone, a dead car, and a daughter who desperately needed medical attention. That's when she heard the sound of an expensive engine pulling up behind her. Jessica looked in her rearview mirror and saw headlights approaching. Not just any headlights, but the distinctive LED pattern of a luxury vehicle. As the car got closer, she could make out the unmistakable silhouette of a Rolls-Royce Phantom, its chrome grille gleaming under the streetlights. The Rolls-Royce pulled up alongside Jessica's Honda, and the driver's window rolled down silently. Jessica found herself looking directly at a face she'd seen countless times on magazine covers, news programs, and billboards around the city. William Harrison. Not just wealthy, not just successful. William Harrison was Forbes' list, private jet, own your own island wealthy. The kind of billionaire whose net worth was discussed in terms that most people couldn't even comprehend. $12 billion in change, according to the last article Jessica had seen about him at the dentist's office. But right now, he just looked like a concerned man in an expensive suit who had noticed someone in trouble. "Excuse me, are you all right?" His voice was nothing like Jessica expected. No arrogance, no condescension. Just genuine concern from someone who happened to notice a broken-down car on a side street. Jessica stared at him for a moment, wondering if exhaustion and stress were making her hallucinate. William Harrison, the William Harrison, was asking if she was okay. The same man whose tech company had revolutionized cloud computing. The same man whose face was on the cover of Time magazine just last month as America's most generous philanthropist. My car broke down, Jessica managed to say. My daughter is having a severe asthma attack, and I was trying to get her to Children's Hospital. William Harrison's expression immediately shifted to alarm. How severe? Does she need immediate medical attention? Yes, she can barely breathe. We just came from Mercy General, but they... Jessica's voice trailed off. How do you explain to a billionaire that a hospital refused to treat your child because you're poor? They what? His tone sharpened with concern. Jessica took a shaky breath. They refused to treat her because my insurance expired and I couldn't pay up front. The doctor said she wasn't really in an emergency and told us to go to a free clinic that doesn't open until 8 a.m. The temperature in the Rolls-Royce seemed to drop 20 degrees. William Harrison's jaw tightened in a way that suggested someone was about to have a very bad day. They refused to treat a child having an asthma attack. The doctor said I should have thought about healthcare costs before making certain life choices. He called it enabling poor decision-making. Jessica's voice cracked as she repeated the words that had been echoing in her head since leaving the hospital. William Harrison was quiet for a long moment, but Jessica could see his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter. When he spoke again, his voice was controlled but carried an edge that could cut glass. What's your daughter's name? Emma. She's 7. I'm Bill. We're going back to Mercy General right now. Before Jessica could respond, Bill was out of his car and approaching her Honda. He moved with purpose, like a man accustomed to solving problems immediately and efficiently. Can you carry her, or would you like me to? Jessica looked at this stranger who happened to be one of the most powerful men in the country. I can carry her, but Mr. Harrison, you don't understand. They already kicked us out. They said if we came back, they'd call the police for trespassing. Bill Harrison smiled, and it wasn't a particularly pleasant expression. Trust me, they won't call the police. Jessica carefully lifted Emma from the car seat. Her daughter's breathing had become even more labored, and the bluish tint around her lips was more pronounced. They were running out of time. My car, Jessica said weakly, looking back at the Honda. Leave it. I'll have someone handle it tomorrow. Bill was already walking toward the Rolls-Royce, holding the rear door open. Right now, we need to get Emma the help she needs. The interior of the Rolls-Royce was unlike anything Jessica had ever experienced. The seats were softer than her couch at home, and the car was so quiet she could barely hear the engine running. But luxury was the last thing on her mind as she held Emma close, watching her daughter struggle with each breath. How long has she had asthma? Bill asked as they drove back toward Mercy General. 3 years. It started after we had to move to a cheaper apartment that had mold problems. I couldn't afford to break the lease, so we stayed there for 6 months before I could save enough to move again. By then, the damage was done. Bill glanced at her in the rearview mirror. You're a single mother? Yes, sir. Emma's father left when she was 2. Said he didn't sign up for a sick kid and bills he couldn't afford. Jessica's voice was matter of fact. She'd long since stopped feeling sorry for herself about David's abandonment. What do you do for work? I'm a waitress at Mel's 24-hour cafe downtown. I work double shifts when I can get them, but with Emma's medical appointments and school, it's hard to pick up extra hours. They were pulling into Mercy General's parking lot now. Bill parked directly in front of the emergency room entrance, in a spot clearly marked for ambulances only. He didn't seem concerned about parking regulations. Mr. Harrison, Jessica started, I really appreciate this, but they're not going to change their minds just because you're here. They made it clear that people like me aren't welcome. Bill turned around to look at Jessica and Emma directly. His expression was calm, but there was something in his eyes that suggested a storm was brewing. Jessica, I need to tell you something. I wasn't just driving randomly through this neighborhood at 2:30 in the morning. I was coming back from visiting my mother. She's been in the ICU here for the past week recovering from surgery. Jessica's heart sank. Of course, he was probably a major donor, someone the hospital bent over backwards to accommodate. That's why he was so confident they'd help Emma now. The thing is, Bill continued, I've been visiting her every night for a week. I've seen how this place operates. I've watched them treat families differently based on their ability to pay. I've seen the luxury wing they built for wealthy patients while cutting staff in the emergency room. But tonight is the first time I've witnessed them actually turn away a child in medical distress. He got out of the car and opened Jessica's door. What happened to you? And Emma wasn't just wrong. It was evil. And the man who did it has no idea who he's been taking money from. As they approached the hospital entrance, Jessica realized that Bill Harrison wasn't just angry about what had happened to them. He was furious in the way that only someone with unlimited resources and a moral compass could be. This wasn't about charity or pity. This was about justice. The same security guard, Frank, was still at his post near the entrance. When he saw Jessica returning with Emma, his face filled with concern. But when he recognized the man walking beside her, his expression shifted to something approaching panic. "Mr. Harrison? Sir, what are you doing here so late? Is everything all right with your mother?" "My mother is fine, Frank. But I need to speak with Dr. Blackwood immediately. And I need to see the administrator on duty." Frank looked confused and nervous. "Sir, it's almost 3 a.m. The administrator isn't here, and Dr. Blackwood is with a patient. Then get him away from the patient. Now." Bill's voice carried the kind of authority that moved mountains and toppled governments. "Tell him William Harrison needs to speak with him about a medical emergency that occurred earlier tonight." Frank's eyes widened as he looked between Bill, Jessica, and Emma. The pieces were clearly falling into place in his mind. "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." As Frank hurried toward the emergency room, Jessica felt like she was watching events unfold from outside her own body. 30 minutes ago, she'd been a desperate single mother with a dead car and an expired insurance card. Now she was walking back into the hospital that had rejected her daughter, accompanied by one of the most powerful men in the country. "Mr. Harrison," she whispered, "what's going to happen?" Bill looked down at Emma, who was still struggling to breathe in Jessica's arms, and then met Jessica's eyes. "What's going to happen is that your daughter is going to get the medical care she needs. And Dr. Blackwood is going to learn that some decisions cost more than others." Through the hospital's glass doors, Jessica could see Frank talking urgently to someone at the reception desk. Within moments, Dr. Blackwood appeared, still looking perfectly composed in his pristine white coat. He was walking with the confident stride of someone who believed he was in complete control of his domain. That confidence was about to be tested in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. As they entered the hospital, Jessica heard Bill Harrison say quietly, "This is going to be interesting." But Jessica was focused on something else entirely. For the first time in hours, she felt hope. Not because a billionaire had decided to help her, but because she could see in his eyes that he understood exactly what had happened here tonight. He understood that this wasn't just about Emma's asthma attack. This was about the kind of person who could look at a sick child and see only a billing problem. And William Harrison clearly didn't like that kind of person very much. Dr. Richard Blackwood approached with his usual air of authority, but something in his stride faltered when he saw Jessica and Emma again. His confusion deepened when he noticed the impeccably dressed man beside them, someone who clearly didn't belong in his mental category of charity cases. "Mr. Harrison," Dr. Blackwood said with a forced smile, "I wasn't expecting to see you again tonight. Is there something wrong with your mother?" "My mother is recovering beautifully. Thank you," Bill replied calmly. "I'm here about this woman and her daughter, who you refused to treat approximately 1 hour ago." Dr. Blackwood's face went through several rapid changes. Confusion, recognition, then a carefully controlled mask of professional concern. "Ah yes, the Thompson case. As I explained to Mrs. Thompson, we were at capacity and the child's condition wasn't severe enough to warrant emergency intervention." Bill looked around the nearly empty emergency room, then back at Dr. Blackwood. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of someone who was used to being heard. "Doctor, I've been visiting this hospital every night for a week. I've never seen it at capacity. In fact, right now I count 4 empty beds in your emergency bay and 2 nurses standing idle. So help me understand your medical assessment." Dr. Blackwood's composure cracked slightly. "Mr. Harrison, I appreciate your concern, but medical decisions require professional judgment about resource allocation and patient prioritization." "Of course they do," Bill agreed. "So let's talk about your professional judgment. You looked at a 7-year-old girl with blue lips who was struggling to breathe, and you determined she wasn't in medical distress." Children often present with dramatic symptoms that appear worse than they are. Dr. Blackwood repeated his earlier explanation, but his voice lacked its previous confidence. Bill nodded slowly. I see. And your recommendation was that Mrs. Thompson take her daughter to a free clinic on Maple Street. That's correct. The clinic is equipped to handle non-emergency respiratory issues. The clinic that's been closed for 2 years? The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Dr. Blackwood's face went completely white. Nurse Linda Hayes, who had been watching from a distance, gasped audibly. Even Frank the security guard stepped back as if he'd witnessed a murder. I'm sorry. Dr. Blackwood's voice came out as barely a whisper. The Maple Street Community Health Clinic, Bill continued in that same eerily calm tone, closed permanently in October of 2022 due to funding cuts. It's been an empty building for 2 years. Everyone in the medical community knows this. So when you send a mother with a dying child to a non-existent clinic, were you simply incompetent, or were you hoping the child would die? Dr. Blackwood's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. There must be some mistake. I was thinking of a different clinic. Which clinic? Bill's question was sharp as a blade. The one. There are several free clinics in the city. Name one that's currently operating and treats pediatric respiratory emergencies at 3 a.m. Dr. Blackwood couldn't answer because there wasn't one. Everyone in the room knew it. The silence stretched until Emma's labored breathing was the only sound. Bill turned to Nurse Linda. How long would it take to give this child a standard nebulizer treatment? About 15 minutes, sir, Linda answered immediately. Cost to the hospital? Maybe $12 in medication and supplies. And if her condition is as serious as it appears, what happens if she doesn't receive treatment? Linda glanced nervously at Dr. Blackwood, then back at Bill. She could go into respiratory arrest. A child her age could die. Bill nodded and looked back at Dr. Blackwood. So to clarify, Doctor, you risked a child's life to avoid a $12 expense and sent her to a clinic that doesn't exist. Is that an accurate summary of your professional medical judgment tonight? Mr. Harrison, you don't understand the pressures we face with uninsured patients. We can't treat everyone who walks through these doors without some consideration of financial impact. Actually, doctor, I understand better than you think. You see, I've been reviewing this hospital's financial records quite closely lately. My foundation has donated over $50 million to Mercy General over the past 5 years. $50 million that was specifically designated for emergency care for underprivileged families. The color drained from Dr. Blackwood's face so quickly Jessica thought he might faint. You didn't know that, did you? Bill continued. The Harrison Foundation has been your largest single donor, but we donate anonymously. We've been funding exactly the kind of care you just refused to provide. Dr. Blackwood was now visibly shaking. Mr. Harrison, I had no idea. If you had known I was watching, you would have treated her? So your medical ethics depend on who's in the room? That's fascinating. Bill pulled out his phone and dialed a number. When someone answered, his voice remained calm but deadly serious. Margaret, it's Bill Harrison. I need you to immediately halt all current and future donations from the Harrison Foundation to Mercy General Hospital. Yes, all of them, including the new pediatric wing we were funding. I also need you to contact our legal team about retrieving any unspent funds from previous donations that have been misappropriated. Dr. Blackwood looked like he was having a heart attack. Mr. Harrison, please, there must be some misunderstanding. We can resolve this. Bill held up a hand for silence and continued his phone call. Also, Margaret, I need you to contact the board members of Mercy General Hospital. All of them. I don't care what time it is. Tell them there will be an emergency meeting at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. And if they're not there, they can consider themselves replaced. He hung up and looked back at Dr. Blackwood. You want to resolve this? Let's start by getting Emma the medical treatment she needs. Right now. Dr. Blackwood practically ran to prepare the nebulizer equipment himself, his hands shaking as he worked. Nurse Linda took over, her movements efficient and caring as she set up the breathing treatment that should have been started an hour ago. As the medication began flowing through the nebulizer mask, Emma's breathing started to ease almost immediately. The bluish tint around her lips began to fade, and her small body relaxed as oxygen flowed more freely through her airways. Better, Jessica whispered to her daughter, and Emma nodded weakly but definitely. Bill watched the treatment with the intensity of someone who was memorizing every detail for later use. When Emma was clearly breathing easier, he turned back to Dr. Blackwood. $50 million, he said quietly. That's what your prejudice just cost this hospital. But that's just the beginning. Dr. Blackwood was sweating now despite the cool hospital air. Mr. Harrison, surely we can work something out. This was an isolated incident, a misunderstanding. An isolated incident. Bill pulled out his phone again and showed Dr. Blackwood the screen. I've spent the last hour having my people pull security footage from tonight and the past month. Would you like to see how many other families you've turned away? Because I have a compilation ready. The video showed family after family being dismissed by Dr. Blackwood. Poor families, immigrant families, elderly patients without supplemental insurance. Case after case of the same pattern. Quick judgments based on appearance, dismissive attitudes, and referrals to clinics that were either closed or inappropriate for the medical conditions presented. 17 families in the past month alone, Bill said as the video played. 17 times you've prioritized billing over human life. And this footage is going to be very interesting to the state medical board, don't you think? Dr. Blackwood was now visibly crying. Please, Mr. Harrison, I have a family, a mortgage, children in private school. This job is my whole career. You should have thought about your family before you decided that other people's families didn't matter. Bill's phone rang, and he answered immediately. Yes, Margaret. Perfect. How many? All of them. Outstanding. He hung up and smiled at Dr. Blackwood, but it was the kind of smile that sharks gave to seals. Interesting news, Doctor. It turns out that Mercy General Hospital's board of directors is very concerned about maintaining their relationship with the Harrison Foundation. So concerned, in fact, that they've just voted unanimously to terminate your employment effective immediately. They're also launching a full investigation into your treatment patterns and considering whether to report you to the Medical Licensing Board for potential malpractice. Dr. Blackwood collapsed into a nearby chair. You can't do this. I've worked here for 15 years. I have rights. You absolutely have rights, Bill agreed. You have the right to face the consequences of your actions. You also have the right to explain to your family why Daddy lost his job because he couldn't be bothered to treat a sick child. But Bill wasn't finished. He made another phone call, this time putting it on speaker. Dr. Martinez? It's Bill Harrison. I need you to make some calls to the other major hospitals in the city. Dr. Richard Blackwood from Mercy General is going to be looking for a new position soon, and I want to make sure everyone understands why he's available. The voice on the other end was crisp and professional. Of course, Mr. Harrison. What should we tell them? Tell them he refused emergency treatment to a child having an asthma attack because her family couldn't pay up front. Tell them he sent them to a clinic that's been closed for 2 years. Tell them he's been systematically discriminating against poor patients while taking money from a foundation specifically designed to fund their care. Understood. I'll make sure that information reaches the right people. Dr. Blackwood looked up in horror. You're destroying my entire career. No, doctor. You destroyed your career the moment you looked at a dying child and saw only a billing problem. I'm just making sure everyone knows who you really are. Emma's breathing treatment was complete, and she was sitting up in Jessica's arms, looking around with clear, bright eyes. The transformation was remarkable. Bill knelt down to Emma's level. How are you feeling, sweetheart? Much better. Thank you, Emma said in a small but clear voice. Are you the nice man who helped us? I'm just someone who thinks little girls should be able to breathe, Bill replied gently. He stood and addressed Dr. Blackwood one final time. Security will escort you out now. Your medical license will be under review by the state board within 48 hours, and I can promise you that no reputable hospital in this country will hire you once they understand what kind of doctor you really are. As security led the sobbing Dr. Blackwood away, Bill turned to Jessica. Emma's going to need follow-up care and probably some changes to her medication regimen. I'm setting up an account to cover all her medical expenses. No family should have to choose between rent and their child's breathing. Jessica stared at him through tears. Mr. Harrison, I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me. You just needed someone to care more about your daughter than about money. Unfortunately, that shouldn't be as rare as it apparently is. 6 months later, Jessica still worked at Mel's 24-hour cafe, but Emma's asthma was perfectly controlled with proper medication and regular checkups. They had a reliable car now, thanks to an anonymous donation, and Jessica never had to worry about being able to afford Emma's medical care. Dr. Richard Blackwood, however, had a very different experience. His medical license was permanently revoked after the state board investigation revealed a pattern of discriminatory treatment spanning years. No hospital would hire him, and his malpractice insurance was canceled when the full extent of his actions became public. The final twist came on a rainy Thursday evening 6 months after that night at Mercy General. Jessica was working the late shift at Mel's when a customer walked in around midnight. He was wearing a gas station uniform, his face haggard with exhaustion and defeat. It was Dr. Blackwood. He didn't recognize Jessica at first, focused only on ordering coffee and a cheap sandwich with the kind of careful attention to price that spoke of someone counting every dollar. But when Jessica spoke, his head snapped up in recognition. "Can I get you anything else?" she asked simply. Dr. Blackwood stared at her for a long moment, taking in the irony of the moment. The woman he had dismissed as worthless was now serving him food while he worked the night shift at a gas station. His medical career nothing but a memory. "No," he whispered. "That's all." As he left, Jessica felt no satisfaction in his downfall. She felt only sadness for a man who had thrown away everything he'd worked for because he forgot that every person who walked through those hospital doors was someone's child, someone's parent, someone who mattered. Emma was sleeping peacefully at home, breathing easily in her own bed, dreaming the dreams of healthy 7-year-olds. And somewhere in the city, William Harrison was probably working late in his office, making decisions about where to donate millions of dollars to help people who needed it most. The universe had indeed shown Dr. Blackwood exactly who he really was. The price of that lesson had been everything he thought mattered, but perhaps, in the end, that was exactly what justice looked like.